Hi everyone. I have an interesting little question that we need to discuss here. I just came across this particular video and it riled me up a little bit. So I think we need to explore the question of the death penalty. Is it something that we should have? Is it a terrible, cruel, and inhumane thing that we need to get rid of? And is it hypocrisy for someone who is pro-life um, or a Christian to support the death penalty, capital punishment? Well, let's go ahead and discuss that today. And we're going to discuss that in context of Graf's grievances as laid out in this particular video that that he recently dropped on the subject. And if you want to watch this video uninterrupted with my commentary, feel free to go over to his channel and watch it there. But what I'm going to do for the purposes of this video is we're going to watch it together, and I'm going to pause it periodically to give a running commentary on it. And without further ado, let's dive right in.
Stone.
I'm going to back it up a little bit.
That is without sin, cast the first stone. All that and more now on Graf's Grievances.
Okay, yeah, that is a Bible verse. Let him that is without sin cast the first stone. So firstly, that does not mean that no one ever should get punished for anything. That was a very contextualized um, quote of Jesus in a situation where a woman had been falsely accused and set up. She had been caught in the very act of adultery, and the religious leaders of Jesus' time asked him, because according to the law, adultery was something punishable by capital punishment, by death. Um, and so they asked him, according to the law, this woman who was caught in the act of adultery should be executed for that crime. And scholars believe, and this is my take on it as well, you can't just catch a woman in the act of adultery without also catching her lover, the one that she was committing adultery with. Jesus believes it was actually one of the men there present who was her accuser. So they had conspired to set this woman up and to use her to tempt the Lord. And he knew that. But don't take that one incident out of context and try to apply it too broadly. That would be fallacious thinking. I would like to say too, while we're getting started here, pro-life Republicans love the death penalty. I think that's supposed to be ironic or somehow highlight the hypocrisy of pro-life Republicans. Well, let me say first of all, I'm not a Republican. Um, I am a loyal, patriotic citizen of my country. Um, Although I'm keenly aware of America's flaws and shortcomings. But I do tend to vote Republican to the best of my ability, but there have been situations where I have voted against a Republican for reasons of corruption or what have you. But I am, however, pro-life, and the Bible is very pro-life. God loves kids, and science makes it pretty clear. Abortionists like to use abortion advocates like to use that phrase "my body, my choice." Well, guess what? That little clump of cells is actually not a woman's body. The fetus or unborn baby that is developing inside her, it's genetically different than she is. It is scientifically, provably not her body. And so abortion is murder of another human being, and you can see my video on that. Abortion is a great evil under all circumstances, even in cases of rape, incest, and things like that. You don't murder an innocent because of the sins of the father. That is a wicked thing. And you might think that's controversial. I have a whole video on it. You can go watch that if you want to explore that subject in more detail. But we'll talk about whether it is actually hypocritical for someone who is pro life to support the death penalty.
Right before 8 p.m. Friday night, Smith began to shake and wither violently, the force of his seizure like movements causing the gurney he was on to visibly move as his arms pulled against the straps, tying him down. He then lifted his head before quickly falling back, hitting the gurney, his chest noticeably rising as he took a series of last gasping breaths. By 8:25, Kenneth Eugene Smith was declared dead, becoming the first person in America to be executed by nitrogen gas.
So I will say this. Um, Suffocation is apparently, and drowning by extension, kind of similar. Oxygen deprivation, it's, from what I understand, these can be some of the most excruciatingly painful ways to die. So this would be cruel and unusual punishment, I think. Now understand that traditionally there are some very efficient methods of execution which we should be using, and we've gotten away from those for various politically correct reasons in this country. He's going to talk, this fellow Graf, I assume that's his name based on his channel. I don't really know this fellow at all. Um, but he's going to talk quite critically about death by firing squad, which actually is quite humane. Having expert marksmen put one or more bullets through your center of mass kills you pretty quickly, especially depending on what firearm you're using. That's actually a very humane way to kill somebody. And that can be done in a way as well where dummy rounds are given to some of those marksmen, so none of them really knows who had the killing shot. I think that's actually a great way to do it. If you have a single individual who's responsible for executions and they're doing that over and over and over again, it does take a toll on them spiritually, and that toll can really mess them up. And so I think having a system where some of your marksmen on your firing squad actually have dummy rounds, and there is that element of uncertainty there, I think that is a good way to help those men cope with having to do their duty and take the life of another human being, which is never a good or easy thing, even if it's someone who richly deserves the punishment that they're being delivered. Now, let me say that this idea of this new method of executing people with gas, now nitrogen I think is an inert gas. This guy basically just had the oxygen displaced from his lungs and died a painful suffocation death, basically. As I said, that is a cruel and unusual means of execution, and I don't think we should be using it. I do think that we should go back to the old school ways of execution, which were firing squad, hanging, which when done correctly breaks the neck and is very quick, and the guillotine was actually devised to be a method of execution. Now that one, for various historic reasons and because it is exceedingly messy, um, people kind of balk at that, and that's understandable. Historically, here in this country, hanging and the firing squad have been the way that we've gone. Um, there may be others that I just can't think of off the top of my head, um, but I see no reason why we wouldn't want to go back to those. Um, a length of rope or a half dozen bullets are incredibly cheap. You can get the cost of a public execution, or I should say, the cost of capital punishment. You can make that very inexpensive. However, these newer methods, not only are they more expensive, more horrifying, less humane, but they're also not very efficient or effectual. And what do I mean by that? So, electrocuting someone, um, the electric chair. People have different tolerances to electricity. I am actually fairly resistant to electrical shock. It doesn't really bother me too much. Um, and there are many documented cases of them trying to, fry someone, electrocute them to death, and it just doesn't take. And they have to do it over and over and over again, and it's basically torturous for the person involved. Um, Anything that is inefficient is not it's not a proper, that would be cruel and unusual punishment. Um, Likewise, the triple cocktail of drugs that was used for lethal injection, that's cruel and unusual, because what would happen is it's my understanding that the triple cocktail, first they'd be administered, well, the first two would be a painkiller and a paralytic. I forget which order. And then the final one would actually be the shot that would be lethal. So it's a triple cocktail, three different injections. Extremely expensive. Talking tens of thousands of dollars to carry out an execution because the pharmaceutical companies are selling these drugs. By the way, if you don't see the problem there and understand why this method of execution has been implemented, Big Pharma, their inappropriate and improper influence over government, and they're lobbying for this sort of thing because it's making money for Big Pharma selling these drugs. Now, from what this fellow says, lethal injections kind of on the outs, but understand that they've been using these inhumane and ineffective because what often happens with the lethal injection is that either the painkillers or the paralytics don't take, or people are resistant to the lethal part of it, and again, they suffer excruciatingly before they die, and that's not the point of capital punishment. It needs to be quick and clean. It's not about making somebody suffer. It's about removing them permanently from society because their crimes were so heinous that they can't be rehabilitated. However, these inhumane methods of capital punishment have replaced older, more humane methods that we used to use historically, and then critics of capital punishment and the death penalty then point to the inhumane methods that we use now and say, oh, this is wasteful, it costs tens of thousands of dollars to do this, and it doesn't work, it doesn't take a lot of the time, or the the prisoner suffers greatly. Um, yeah, true on all counts. That just means we're using the wrong methods for capital punishment. We need to get back to more humane methods like they used to do back in the day. So I will give him this. I do think that suffocating people to death with uh, nitrogen gas, it's inhumane. It is cruel and unusual. And let's carry on.
That sickening account from an AP reporter who witnessed the first of its kind execution in Alabama after the state's previous attempt to execute Smith failed. In 2022, he miraculously survived an hours long attempt to end his life by lethal injection.
Again, there we go. Like I said, lethal injection, the shots are extremely expensive and they don't work a lot of the time. And not a method we should be utilizing. For a couple bucks, you can buy enough ammunition to execute someone via firing squad, and you probably could find volunteers to do it for free without having to pay them. People who or victims or family members of victims of the criminal that you are executing. Um, I'm sure, or officers of law who are involved with the case. I'm sure you would have no shortage of volunteers. You'd probably have to have a lottery to fill spots on firing squads for some of these criminals. Let's carry on.
After being repeatedly stabbed with needles and placed in an inverted crucifix position.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going on with Alabama and whoever it was that was carrying out this death penalty. This whole situation sounds extremely twisted to me. Extremely twisted. But like I said, the method of execution that they're experimenting with here is inhumane, cruel, and unusual. And I kind of wonder, in all honesty, if the optics of these things are being intentionally played in order to try to get rid of the death penalty across the board. We already know that people are doing heinous crimes all across the country, and getting a wrist slap for it, especially if they are here illegally or of certain demographic groups and so forth, and this is intentional. It is part of the communist takeover of our nation. Let's carry on.
Alabama given the go ahead to execute Smith with nitrogen gas after a legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Smith's attorneys arguing that Alabama was using their client as a test subject for a new execution method that violates the constitutional ban on cruel and unusual punishment. The Supreme Court ultimately declining to intervene, with the court's three liberal members dissenting.
So, yeah, and I agree with this too. I think it is cruel and unusual, this particular method of execution. Completely in agreement there.
Smith, who was convicted of a 1988 murder for hire killing, saying in a final statement with his spiritual advisor, quote, "The eyes of the world are on this impending moral apocalypse. We simply cannot normalize the suffocation of each other."
Um, and I would agree with that too. I don't think that this is a method of capital punishment that should be normalized. I will say though, on the flip side, that this fellow and his legal team would likely try to stir up some moral fervor against any method being used against him in all reality, given his situation. But let's continue on.
However, despite Smith's plea, now Alabama's Attorney General, Steve Marshall, wants to help other states implement this new method for carrying out capital punishment. Marshall saying after Smith's death, quote, "Alabama has done it, and now so can you. We stand ready to assist you in implementing this method in your states." Yes, that is what he literally said. Imagine taking pride in helping kill people and proudly advertising your services to assist others do the same. It sounds, ironically, like murder for hire.
All right, so we have to address that. This fellow Graff uses the terms kill, taking of life, and murder, and he kind of equates them, but they are not the same whatsoever. For example, I believe it's the sixth commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Um, the best commentary on the Bible is the Bible itself, so you have to take that in biblical context. In that context, we're talking about murder. Thou shalt not commit murder. And murder is the unsanctioned taking of human life. So that commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," it doesn't apply to animals, and it doesn't apply to the sanctioned taking of human life. The Bible is actually very clear that there are different situations where the taking of human life is acceptable. Warfare would be one. The Bible actually outright says that there is a time for war. Sometimes you just cannot resolve things in a peaceable manner. And what are you going to do? Are you going to let a corrupt nation walk all over you and destroy your people? Or are you going to stand up and fight? Sometimes war and killing is necessary. Self-defense. The Bible specifically says if someone breaks into your house and you strike them so that they die, their blood's not on your hands. You've defended yourself. You've defended your property. You've defended your family. That is sanctioned killing. Another thing that is sanctioned killing in the Bible is the death penalty. Now, understand something. We don't live under biblical theocracy today, but there was a time when the Hebrews did. They lived under a system of government that was ruled by God, and the death penalty did exist under that system for many things, for vile murder, for example, for rape, for adultery and fornication. So it was a lot stricter than our legal system today, for sure. And I'm not advocating that we get back to that. I don't think we can put the what's the expression? Put the cat back in the bag, so to speak, on that stuff. The our societal moral values have changed significantly. you'd be killing half the country if we brought back the death penalty for fornication or for adultery. Um, but the bottom line remains that there are some heinous crimes that should incur the death penalty. That is a biblical principle. And I believe for our modern times that they are vile murder, um, pedophilia, and violent rape. Now, obviously, all of those we need to kind of maybe define in a little more detail before, fully implementing all this. The reason I say, for example, violent rape and just not rape in general is because a lot of rape situations, or accusations anyways, tend to be he said, she said, and can't be substantiated one way or another. So when we're talking about violent, forcible rape that, can be demonstrated to have happened, um, that would be one thing. You wouldn't obviously execute someone on a questionable or shaky accusation. But then pedophiles, again, they have crossed some lines that, there's no coming back from some of this stuff. Unfortunately, in this country, they have a system where it's catch and release for some of these criminals, and now they're out there, and sure, they have these registries and stuff like that, but these people shouldn't be around anymore at all to continue with their behaviors, um, to keep putting out and promoting their behaviors, by sharing CP, child pornography, and other things, and, acclimatizing other people to the same sorts of things, and basically converting others to their way of behavior. There are some heinous crimes that are so heinous that those people need to be purged from society. Is that murder? Well, this fellow here equates that with murder, but it isn't. The Bible actually has purposes of government, and the purposes of government, it's to be a sword and a terror to evildoers. And we're going to read a passage from Romans in just a moment. The death penalty is actually part of the government's role, and it's different when the government um, executes someone as a punishment for their crimes. That is different from committing murder on an individual level. Very different. And I would say that it is actually the duty of government to purge certain criminals from our midst so that they will not be repeat offenders. You're going to have a lot fewer serial killers if you start taking these people out when they've only, gotten started on their careers. You can't give a wrist slap to this stuff. And there's a reason why I use those terms, sword and terror. So terror is a deterrent. If people know that the punishments are serious and that they will be enforced, and that there will, in fact, be justice for all, under a system like that, yeah, there is a deterrent factor. There is, and I don't care that, there's a lot of people who will say, no, no, having a death penalty, having capital punishment, it does not function as a deterrent. Sure, it does. It absolutely does. But for those that the deterrent or the terror doesn't work on, then there's the sword. You take them out of circulation. They're not going to be a repeat offender if they're dead. That's the bottom line. But understand there's all this innocent blood that's been shed in this country. There's all these children that have been abused, people who have been sexually molested, and innocent blood that's been shed, and it hasn't been atoned for by taking the life of those responsible. That's a blood guiltiness that is settled on this land. And there will be an accountability for it eventually, for those individuals involved, but also for the system that allowed these evildoers to walk free or gave them a wrist slap sort of punishment. Is it just to just take some of these people and give them life in prison, to where now the public, via their tax money, their labor is literally going to sustain the life of these evildoers forever? Is that just? Is it just that your tax money is going to feed and clothe and put a roof over the head of some pedophile or some serial killer that's in prison for life? Is that just? It is not. Yes, I am in favor of the death penalty, and that is a conversation that, as a nation, we should have again. We need to bring back humane methods of execution, and we need to get back to seriously applying a system of law and order and justice for all. You know, the ideal, one of the ideals that the American system was founded upon. Um, Whereas right now we're under a system of um, rules for thee but not for me. You know, where those who rule us think that they are the exception to the rules, and we're in a system of lawfare, where the legal system gets wielded against people to destroy them whenever they get on the wrong side of the establishment or of certain powerful people in positions of government and so forth. Um, or you know, those who have money and can afford the best lawyers, uh, or those who have a particular political view get off scot free, while others who have a different political view or who are too poor to afford good defense um, get railroaded and their lives and families destroyed. Yeah, that's not what this nation was ever supposed to be. We need to get back to a system of justice, justice for all. And if the government's not going to give it to us, eventually the people are going to reach the point where they're so sick and fed up with all the festering cesspool of corruption that our country's become, that they're going to start taking justice into their own hands. It's just an eventuality. Let's continue.
And that is exactly where we are today. A Republican pro life attorney general offering his expertise in nitrogen gas executions with the hope that other states will jump on the murder bandwagon. In addition
Again, not murder. This fellow needs to look up the difference between killing and murder.
to Alabama, two other states, Mississippi and Oklahoma, have approved nitrogen hypoxia as an execution method, though they have not yet employed it. And in Ohio, a new bill released just this week would permit executions by nitrogen hypoxia in addition to lethal injection. Nebraska and Louisiana are also considering executions by oxygen deprivation. Several other states, including Utah and South Carolina, have efforts underway to use firing squads for executions.
He makes it sound like an outrageous thing, but it's something that was done in the past. It's one of the most economical ways and humane ways to carry out capital punishment. And yes, there are many states that are considering bringing this back, and I think that's a good thing. Um,
Yes, firing squads. This barbaric push to expand the methods states can employ to kill their own citizens comes as pharmaceutical companies have started blocking their drugs from being used for lethal injection, which has been the primary method of execution since the 1980s. But what is incomprehensible to me is why capital punishment is even legal in the United States. The Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution explicitly bans, quote, cruel and unusual punishments from being inflicted on anyone. Yet 20.
so there's a big difference between a punishment and a cruel and unusual punishment. And we've touched on this already, but let me say that you know, killing someone, well, applying the death penalty, capital punishment, the idea there is not to make the person suffer. Um, you know, as a born again Christian, I believe that there is accountability in the hereafter. Everyone stands before God's throne and answers to Him one day. Oh, trust me, there's going to be punishment and suffering for those who commit heinous crimes. God's going to balance all the books. So don't worry about that. No, the purpose of capital punishment is to just remove those who commit heinous crimes from society, to purge them from the land, and to satisfy the cries of the innocent blood that was shed by them. It's not it's not going to be a perfect justice. That's something that God delivers. It is just uh, a measure of purging this evil from the land, and our failure to do that is one contributing factor in the decline of our nation, and really in the decline of the West. Let's carry on. So, and actually, this is an important point. You kind of see the roots of this thinking in this fellow. There are some people who they're always going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get rid of all punishments. This is the folks who are in favor of, who think that you should be able to go into a department store and just take whatever you want because it's, insured. You're not really hurting anybody, you know, and that people just should get a wrist slap for some of these crimes, and it's no big deal. Um, as I said, though, there does need to be punishment for wrongdoing. Otherwise, society breaks down. If there's no punishments whatsoever for anything, that's anarchy. And actually, it gets to the point where the evildoers who are doing heinous things, they're running roughshod over everyone else without consequence. And as I already mentioned, in a situation like that, if the government's not going to be um, requiting evildoers for their misdeeds, then the people will start doing it out of necessity, just out of self-preservation. But there's a big difference between a cruel and unusual punishment and just a punishment. And capital punishment, if it's swift and as painless as possible, I mean, there's probably always going to be some pain with death. I've never died, so I can't really say one way or another. Um, but I don't imagine that any form of dying is particularly pleasant, but it can be made very quick. Um, Actually, vaporization would probably be pretty painless because it could be done instantaneously with the right apparatus. And if your nerve endings no longer exist, you're not perceiving pain anymore. But yeah, again, this is sort of some of the thinking that you see these days, that really there should be no consequences for anything, no personal responsibility whatsoever. Everyone just gets to do whatever they want, to live as they feel.
7 states still have the death penalty on the books, and 53% of Americans are in favor of it for a
Absolutely.
person convicted of murder, according to Gallup. And as you might surmise, it is Republicans who most support killing people convicted of crime.
Yeah, because I think you're going to find that Republicans in general are more faith oriented than Democrats are. Democrats have replaced their faith with the state. The state is the object of their faith, and to be more specific, their vision of it, the communist system that they seek to bring about. The state is incapable, however, because it is just an institution that is presided over by humans who are fallible and subject to temptation and wickedness. The government can never solve all of humanity's problems, and it is a poor substitute for faith. But yeah, Republicans do tend to be more religious and actually have more traditional moral values than the Democrats, I would say. That's probably likely. And, the Bible is very clearly in favor of the death penalty. So, makes sense.
81% of them favoring capital punishment, with 65% of Democrats opposing it. Furthermore, 62% of Republicans say the death penalty is not used enough.
Yeah, true.
These are some of the same people who proudly talk about carrying their pocket constitutions wherever they go, their reverence for life, their close relationship with God, and how all of their actions are guided by the words of the Bible.
Um, I have yet to meet anyone in my circles of old-fashioned patriotic Bible-believing Americans who carries a pocket constitution around. That's a little bit out there. And I don't think most honest Christians would even say that all their actions are guided by the Bible. We do live in a fallen world, and none of us are perfect. I think ideally we're trying to allow our actions to be guided by the Bible. But as I said, the Bible is advocates, it clearly supports capital punishment and the death penalty. That's very clear from the Old Testament laws. And then we will read at the end of this, in just a little bit here, a passage from Romans that lays out the purpose of government.
It is all a lie, and nothing better exposes their insincerity than their support for the death penalty.
I don't think you've demonstrated that, Graf. I'm sorry. I've just shown you that being pro-life and also pro-death penalty is completely consistent within the framework of Scripture. Let's read a little bit from Romans 13 here. This passage often gets overemphasized in terms of the Christians' responsibilities to government, but understand that government also has some responsibilities to Christians. To the citizenry. But let me read a little bit of this here. Let every soul be subject. This is from Romans 13. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now, we're not talking about eternal spiritual damnation here. We're just referring to judgment. You go against the government, you're probably going to get the government's judgment coming down on your head one way or another. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. So we see here these two concepts of terror and of the sword. So terror, that's your deterrent to evildoers. If they see other evildoers being punished, seriously punished for their evil deeds, yes, it is a deterrent. And for some, it won't be, because, yeah, there are some crazy people out there who think they're smarter than everyone else and that they'll never get caught, or that think that they're better than everyone else, and they're going to do what they want no matter what. That's where the sword comes in. It is actually one of the roles of government to act as a proxy of God and to execute wrath upon evildoers. And a whole lot more could be said about this passage. Understand that we're talking about a functional government that is seeking to implement law and order. There is a time, and there have been times and places in history where governments have become exceedingly corrupt and gotten away from the responsibility that they have to their people. The responsibility being they should be rewarders of those who are doing good, and they should be terrors to those who are doing evil. When a government flips the other way, eventually the people are going to be forced to take matters into their own hands and possibly even destroy that government just out of self-preservation. It happens again and again. It's a cycle that we see all throughout history. But that's a topic for another day. I hope you found this to be interesting. As always, feel free to leave me some comments and have a good day.